Gonzaga made 4 scholarship offers last week in what could be an era-defining offseason for Mark Few's club.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Monday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here back from vacation to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control over your finances by using Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Well, folks, it is a mailbag edition of the show today. Got some great stuff for you all. We're talking new players on Coach Lisa Fortier's women's basketball team. We're going to talk about how the ACC's future could shape the Pac-12, especially with the recent news that North Carolina is exploring a potential move to the SEC in about a half decade. We're also going to talk about some recruiting stuff, some potential additions for Gonzaga's upcoming roster, even talk about some video game stuff to close out the show. Fun one for you all today. We'll get started right here. This first question comes from Pilot Cam on Instagram, who says, looks like Gonzaga made a handful of offers this past week. Which of those players is the best fit for the Zags, and or which is most likely to end up in Spokane? Yeah, Gonzaga got busy last week making 4 different scholarship offers, 3 of them in the class of 2026, 1 of them in the class of 2027. This is in addition to the many other scholarship offers that Gonzaga already has out, including the top player in the 2026 class, Tyron Stokes, top player in the 2027 class, Baba Oladutin, as well as players like Cameron Holmes and Sam Funches and Ikenna Elozi, Hurley Brutus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 4 more names added to the list. Those 4 players are Bo Ogden, 45th ranked player in the 2026 class, Ethan Harris, who's barely ranked 249th in the 2026 class, according to On3. He is from Camas, Washington, though, so a local boy. JRob Croy, who's 107th in the 2026 class, and then Gene Roebuck, who's the only player in the 2027 class who got an offer. Bo Ogden, again, ranked 45th. He is probably the best, most talented player out of this group. He named Gonzaga in his top 6, but he does not have a visit scheduled to Spokane. In fact, there really wasn't a lot of rumbling about Bo Ogden out there until he suddenly released his top 6, and it included Gonzaga. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's not a bad thing. In fact, and sometimes that can be a good thing. It means maybe that Gonzaga snuck in under the wire and kind of made a late push for him, and he's genuinely interested. He could have just put them on there to kind of make his list look a little bit better. We know recruits sometimes do that. So at this point, it's kind of hard to say. Without him planning to visit, at least not publicly planning to visit, I would think that the odds of Gonzaga landing him are fairly low. But in terms of the best player, I think it probably is him. However, arguably the best fit might be JRob Croy, who again is just outside the top 100. Clemson's in the mix, Oregon's in the mix, Stanford's in the mix, Texas A&M is in the mix. He's a player who is a late riser in that 2026 class, and Gonzaga loves their late risers. This is an area they have thrived in recruiting. Davis Fogel was a late riser. Braden Huff was a late riser. Corey Kispert was a late riser. This happens very regularly for Gonzaga. Croy's an oversight or a guard with good positional size, about 6'5". He can shoot it well. Again, rising late in that class. That strikes me as a kind of Gonzaga type player. We don't know enough about Roebuck at this point. He is ranked highly in the 2027 class, 38th, but he hasn't been getting a ton of attention outside of the state of California. USC and UCLA do have offers out, but so do like San Francisco and CSUN and Cal State Fullerton. I think right now On3 says Fullerton is in the lead, and Cal State Fullerton, no disrespect, they're not typically landing top 40 players in recruiting classes, so he's one to keep an eye on whether Gonzaga is, again, kind of ahead of the curve here in recruiting somebody that may continue to move up the 2027 class rankings, whether he's somebody that Gonzaga is tentatively interested in. It's kind of hard to say. 2027's still a long ways away from me in terms of how much these players will change over the next year plus, but I would keep an eye on him. And then Ethan Harris, he's the lowest ranked player here, but he's a local boy. That always carries some weight from Camus, like I said. Oregon State, Washington, Boise State have made some offers, Iowa as well. So he's got some high major attention. A guy to keep an eye on, although probably not the best player out of this group, certainly not ranked as the best player out of this group. But again, Gonzaga has absolutely identified lower ranked, especially local talent. Again, Fogle and Kispert fall in that category. And so this is not something that would be too surprising to see Gonzaga get invested in a player who ends up moving up the rankings over the next 9 months or so. Next question here comes from Jack via Twitter. Jack says, if you could add one more available player to Gonzaga's roster for the upcoming season, who would it be and why? The obvious choice is the player that Gonzaga is pursuing in the 2025 class. I guess he's an international player. It's Ivan Bogdanovic. Bogdanovic, of course, is playing over in Croatia. He is Croatian. He's also playing for the Croatian national team in the Euro Cup event coming up, the same event that Mario Saint-Superi is going to leave Spokane to go participate in, the same event that Luka Krajinovic, former Gonzaga guard, is playing in. Krajinovic is actually playing with Bogdanovic with that Croatian team, which maybe that connection could help Gonzaga land the 6'8" forward. But Bogdanovic, he's a little bit older. He's 21, so he'd be coming in with experience already. Wouldn't necessarily be a developmental prospect the same way that many other international players are. He's a stretch 4 type. He's 6'8", but kind of listed almost as a wing or a guard even. I think he could play the small ball 4, and that's kind of the only area on Gonzaga's roster that really could use a boost. Like, I think the center depth is there, the guard depth, the wing depth, especially assuming Tyon Grant-Foster gets his waiver approved, which we are making that assumption at this point. Gonzaga's roster and rotation is already, I mean, they got not 10 guys, maybe 11 guys for 8, maybe 9 spots. So adding another player, you're not adding somebody who's going to play big minutes necessarily. Bogdanovic would probably push somebody out of the rotation, potentially Steele Venters. I think that's assuming Parker Jefferson is already kind of out of the rotation at this point. But he's so talented. He's so good. Adding that kind of player to your depth right away is just, you can't say no to that. And he's getting offers from all sorts of, I think Texas A&M's involved, Michigan's involved. He's getting offers from some really high-profile programs at this point, and for good reason. A few others I'd consider. There's only one freshman in the top 150 at 247 Sports who's uncommitted right now. That's Dorian Jones. Dorian Jones is he decommitted from Ohio State in early June, so that is why he is uncommitted at this point. He's the 87th ranked player in the class according to 247 Sports. He's got offers from Michigan, Arizona State, Cincinnati. 6'4" guard. I don't know how much of a fit he is from just the very little amount of scouting and reading I did. He's a talented player, but I don't really see him as an obvious target for Gonzaga, but he is the only uncommitted freshman at this point that I think makes any real sense for a team like Gonzaga to pursue. And then looking at the transfer portal, it's just barren at this point, as it should be. Players, you don't want to be sitting in the transfer portal still as the calendar is about to flip to August, because you want to have had that chance to work out with your team. Looking at players kind of at positional needs for Gonzaga and with some youth, because you don't want to bring in a senior who's not going to play. The top option, using Evan Miyakawa's fantastic transfer portal rankings, is former Gonzaga forward Graydon Lemke, who, of course, walked onto the team last year and sat all of last year, now has 4 years of eligibility remaining. He is literally the top-ranked freshman forward in the entire transfer portal at this point. So, yeah, that's the guy that I would probably take. Another option is Ring Nieri, who's coming from Kansas City. Nieri's a 6'8" forward who was a freshman last year for the Roos, averaged just under 4 points per game, shot 36% from 3 as a stretch 4. But again, he played 13 minutes per game for a team that went 4-12 in the Summit League. Not exactly a super high-profile option for Gonzaga at this point. So I wouldn't be surprised if they don't make any additions outside of maybe like a walk-on type player, unless they get Bogdanovic, because I just don't think there's a lot of room for them to add anybody unless it's somebody they absolutely have to have, which I think Bogdanovic would qualify in that category. Well, like we said earlier, North Carolina exploring a move to the SEC. What does it mean for the future of the ACC, and how could that impact Gonzaga and the Pac-12? We're going to discuss that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, do you ever wish managing your money just felt a little bit easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's kind of like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility of and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app, however. It is a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Personally, I've found that I just really like having everything all in one place. I don't want to have to go to multiple different apps or track everything on a spreadsheet. I like using Excel. I don't love using Excel for this. So Monarch Money is perfect. It just makes managing that day-to-day financial stuff so much easier. So take control over your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com and you'll get 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And we are now moving into segment 2 of our Mailbag Monday show. I got 2 questions here, both from Jeff via Gmail, both regarding the Pac-12 conference realignment conversation, specifically the news about North Carolina. So we'll start there. First question from Jeff. The news that North Carolina is exploring a future move to the SEC makes it pretty clear there's going to be significant activity and movement with conference realignment around 2030 that will mainly focus on who does or does not leave the ACC. If you are in the Pac-12 offices, do you want more craziness and movement or less? It seems the more crazy it gets with teams leaving the ACC, the better that could be for the Pac-12. Yeah, I kind of disagree. I understand the sentiment. I understand the reasoning. If the ACC does fall apart and starts getting picked apart by the SEC and the Big Ten, the teams that are left over will need somewhere to go. Potentially, that could lead them to the Pac-12, or even if it leads them somewhere else to another conference, those leftovers could end up going to the Pac-12. Ultimately, it could lead to the Pac-12 getting more schools. But the ACC falling apart is bad for the Pac-12. I don't think there's really any other way to look at this. Because right now the conversation around the Pac-12 a lot of the time is, should we call them a power conference team, or is it back to the Power 5? Is it just a Power 4? This is from a football perspective. The Big East is a power conference in basketball, but for football, your Power 4 are your SEC, your Big 10, your Big 12, and your ACC, with Pac-12 kind of trying to flirt with getting into that top 5. However, the actual reality of the situation is that there's 2 power conferences, the SEC and the Big 10. Big 12's hanging on. ACC's hanging on even less, by even more of a thread at this point. Eventually, if this happens and the ACC gets picked apart and North Carolina and Clemson go to the SEC, maybe they can try to find a way to pull Florida State, although I don't know if the SEC wants Florida State. The Big Ten is going to get involved. They're going to snag Notre Dame in all sports. They're going to try to snag some of maybe like a Miami or a Duke or somebody like that. Eventually, the schools that are left are going to be like the Boston Colleges, the Syracuse, the Pitts. Maybe those schools go to the Big 12. Maybe it does result in something where Stanford, Cal, which we're going to talk about in the second question here, try to come back to the Pac-12. Maybe SMU feels left out and they come to the Pac-12. Maybe this does result in the Pac-12 getting some better brands or some bigger brands into the conference in 5 years. But if the ACC is falling apart, there is no possible way that is good news for the Pac-12 and for the sport of college sports, for football and basketball at large. It's just not a good thing if the consolidation of talent continues to happen. It's going to. I think it just feels inevitable at this point, barring some kind of significant change to the rules, which just does not seem likely to happen. So I don't think that we should pretend like this isn't the direction that it's going, but I don't think it's good. It's a good thing for college athletics, and I don't think it's a good thing for the Pac-12, even if it does result or could result in them potentially adding some decently marquee brands out of this whole mess. Next question, again from Jeff, on the same lines. He says, we all know the Pac-12 really wants to get Stanford and Cal back sometime in the future, but if Stanford and Cal and possibly SMU do decide to leave the ACC, would bringing them back really be in the Pac-12's best interest athletically? And since Stanford and Cal are obsessed with Tier 1 research universities, it is likely the Pac-12 would have to add another major research schools, likely Rice or Tulane. Those schools do even less to help the Pac-12 athletics than Stanford and Cal. So if regaining Stanford and Cal also means adding the likes of Rice and Tulane, is regaining in Stanford and Cal really in the best interest of the Pac-12? So if the question is essentially what's better for the Pac-12, adding 4 schools, Stanford, Cal, Rice, and Tulane, or not adding anybody, the answer is adding the 4 schools. It's not particularly close. Stanford and Cal may not be powerhouses in football and men's basketball, and very much so, they are not powerhouses in those sports, but they have history in those sports for starters. They're big schools. They have brand recognition, not a ton, but more than Fresno State, more than Texas State, more than even Utah State and Colorado State, who may have more success, particularly in basketball, but they do not have the brand recognition. Stanford Cal also are elite at Olympic sports. They add to baseball, they add to women's basketball, they add to the other Olympic sports, the tennises, the rowings, the golfs, et cetera, et cetera. And again, they're regionally located schools. Yes, the tier one part of this conversation is a tricky one because Stanford and Cal care deeply about being in a conference that matches them or at least comes close to matching them academically. And this is why Stanford and Cal were so opposed to schools like Boise State and schools like BYU. And I don't know how much it came up in conversation, but schools like Gonzaga. This is why the Pac-12 did not want those schools, because Stanford and Cal stomped their feet and smashed their hands and said, no, we do not want any schools that don't meet our academic standards. I'm not blaming Stanford and Cal for the Pac-12 falling apart. Frankly, I am blaming USC and UCLA for that, but they had a role in the Pac-12 not being able to be proactive enough to add programs like a Boise State or a BYU at times that would have been advantageous for the conference. For that reason, I do not think Stanford and Cal have any interest in returning to the Pac-12. They do not want to do it. Yes, schools like Texas State are working towards getting that tier one status, and there's a chance that the conference does have a good academic standing when some of those things happen. But ultimately, Stanford and Cal would rather go independent than come back to the Pac-12. If the ACC falls apart in a way where they cannot stay in the conference like it doesn't exist anymore, which, by the way, is unlikely to happen. What's likely to happen, and we kind of touched on in that first question, is that some of the bigger brands like North Carolina and Clemson and Florida State and Duke and Miami and those end up going to the SEC and the Big Ten. And then the rest of the schools, again, some of them might get picked off by the Big 12, but some of them might be able to stay and reform a conference. Maybe you get like a Boston College, Virginia Tech, Syracuse, Pitt, whomever. They stay together. They grab Memphis from the AAC. Maybe they even grab a few other schools, South Florida from there. Maybe they try to get some basketball brands like Dayton, St. Louis. Like I think the ACC survives. It's going to survive in the same way the Pac-12 survived. I think there's a chance Stanford Cal stay in that conference potentially and try to keep SMU as well. Ultimately, though, if the Pac-12 has the opportunity to get Stanford and Cal back and they're willing to do it, and part of the stipulation is that you add Rice and Tulane, I think you smash the yes button on that. I think you say absolutely. Tulane's a decent football program. They're not a super negative add. Yeah, Louisiana is not a fun trip, but if you're also adding Rice, you now have the Houston market. And yes, Rice does not carry a lot of weight in terms of the fan base in the Houston area. They don't. Rice is not a school that has traditionally had a super dedicated fan base for any of their athletics. That is a factor, but Rice has a lot of money and they may be very invested in rebuilding and growing and developing their athletic talent, especially if they can join a conference like the Pac-12. If you have Rice, Tulane, and Texas State, you have a footprint out in that area. If you can also get SMU, that is huge. Now you have Dallas, Houston, San Marcos, and Louisiana, New Orleans area for Tulane. That's huge to have all of that. You had a solid football program in Tulane. Yeah, they are not good for basketball. Neither is Rice. It's not great for Gonzaga. Stanford, Cal, Rice, Tulane do not do a lot for Gonzaga. But they're also not dramatically hurting Gonzaga. They're giving them the opportunity to recruit, spend more time in Texas, to spend more time out there, to get back into the Bay Area, to play marquee programs. It's still a good thing for Gonzaga, even if those four don't add to the top level of the talent in the Pac-12. So I think you do this if you're the Pac-12. I just don't think that I think Stanford and Cal would do anything to avoid having to, tuck their tail between their legs and come back to the Pac-12. They don't want to do that. I do not blame them. I think the Big 12 would likely take them at a very, very, very discounted price. And I honestly think those two programs would prefer to go to the Big 12, even if it means getting very little money from that conference, than coming back to the Pac-12. Well, we're switching gears for the final segment. Who are the newcomers joining Coach Lisa Fortier and the women's basketball team? We're going to discuss that and more coming up to close out the show in just a second. But first, folks, have you ever decided last minute You want to head out to a ball game with your friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize, it's just beautiful out. I would way rather be watching this game in the stands than on TV. That is exactly, folks, where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without all the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can also splurge on foods, drinks, merch, even invite a bigger group of friends to come with you. Gametime makes all of that possible because prices on the app, they actually drop the closer that you get to first pitch. And they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying tickets. Gametime is also the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming MLB game or a minor league game. If you're like me, you love minor league baseball. And if you're out in the Spokane area, take in the Spokane Indians. They're hosting the Hillsboro Hops on July 29th, Tuesday. Tickets right down the first base line are just $16 a piece. They were $19 last week when we did this read. So like we said, tickets prices are going down the closer you get to first pitch. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets by using Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still rolling through Mailbag Monday here. 2 more questions to close out the show. This first one comes from Anthony via Gmail. Anthony says, the Lady Zags have big shoes to fill with Yvonne Ejim and 3 other seniors out the door. What has Coach Fortier done this offseason to improve the roster after the program missed the NCAA tournament last year? Yeah, losing Yvonne is devastating. An incredibly, extraordinarily talented player, the leading scorer in Gonzaga basketball history in terms of total points scored. The Zags also lose senior Taylor Dalton, senior Esther Little, and senior Maud Hybens. They had a couple players transfer out as well in what's going to be a transformative season for Coach Fortier and the Zags. 4 transfers coming in, 3 freshmen coming in, as well as a redshirt freshman in Lauren Whitaker. And I want to start with Lauren Whitaker because she sat out last year. I think she actually joined Gonzaga halfway through the previous season. So she's been in Spokane for like a year and a half, but she has yet to set foot on the floor. She's a 6'3" post player. She's from New Zealand. All reports, all signs, everything indicate that when she's healthy and able to go, she's very, very talented. She could be somebody who's immediately one of the best players on this team. I think that's the biggest name to keep an eye on for this upcoming season. The 4 transfers, all were three of the 4 were highly productive at their previous stops. One of them, Taryn Gardner, is from Boise State. She didn't play much for the Broncos, just 3.5 points per game. She's 5'9" guard from Spokane, so she's coming back home to play for the Zags, kind of more of a depth option for a team that has a pretty depleted backcourt after also losing Bree Sallenbien and Claire O'Connor to the transfer portal. The other 3 were all double-digit scorers at their previous stops. You have Taylor Smith, 6'2" forward from Weber State, averaged about 13 points, 6 boards last year. Sierra Lichty, 6 foot forward from Cal Poly. She averaged 10.5 points, 6.7 boards. And then Zia Kuso, 5'10" guard from St. Mary's, averaged 12 points, 3.5 boards, and 3 assists per game, kind of following in the footsteps of Taylor Dalton, who Dalton transferred to Gonzaga after 3 years at St. Mary's, was, I think, according to her, she believes she's the first player in basketball to transfer from St. Mary's to Gonzaga. She may be a trendsetter because Akuso followed suit and is now joining the Zags after a very productive 3-year career for the Gales. So you got a nice replacement in the backcourt in Akuso. You got some depth in Taryn Gardner. You have 2 replacements in the front court in Smith and Lichty, who are both double-digit scorers at mid-major Big West WAC schools out here on the West Coast. You have Lauren Whitaker potentially stepping into a bigger role. So there's a lot of talent joining this team. How the pieces all fit together, what roles people fill, which of the returners step up. We know Allie Turner's back after a ridiculously excellent freshman season. Will Inez Betancourt step into a bigger role? Will we see McKinley Dallin or Vera Gunaden or Cristabella Sorobo step into a bigger role? Those are some of the other questions. And then you have 3 freshmen coming in as well we haven't talked about yet. Unfortunately, with women's basketball, you just don't get a lot of, there's not rankings. There's not places that do that for incoming freshmen. So it's kind of hard to know which of these players will be immediately contributors. I don't think a lot of people expected Allie Turner to set Gonzaga's 3-point program record as a true freshman last year. But the 3 freshmen joining the team this season, Paige Loafing from Montana, Julia Wilson from Temecula, and then Jaden Hale from Fargo, North Dakota. So we'll see if any of them can kind of have like an Allie Turner type freshman season for Coach Fortier and the Zags. Should be a fun season for this program, especially with so much change and turnover. It might be a little bit rocky at times, but I bet it's going to be fun to watch this team come together. Final question of the show here comes from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, so far there's been one Gonzaga player that appeared on the cover of a college basketball video game. That was Adam Morrison about 20 years ago. In the years where EA Sports was not producing the game, were there any Gonzaga players that could have appeared on the cover? Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to be on that cover. You got to be from a top 2-3 team in the country. You got to be an overwhelmingly great player, a recognizable figure. I think the only 2 that are super likely to have, or in any way likely really to have been on the cover over the last 15 years while this game has not been being produced, would be Drew Timme and Jalen Suggs. Drew Timme because he was the face of a program that was consistently ranked in the top 5, that made a run to the national championship, a run to the Elite 8. Drew Timme was a 3-time All-American. He was an instantly recognizable face in college basketball. I would actually be very surprised if Drew Timme hadn't been on a cover. Because you'd have had Zach Edey, you'd have had like Oscar Shibwe, maybe an Armando Bacot, like some of those bigs who were just absolutely dominant forces in college basketball, but none of them had the cachet, the swagger, the kind of national relevance that Drew Timme did for this Gonzaga program. So I think he would have almost certainly been on a cover at some point during his 4-year career at Gonzaga. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jalen Suggs made the 2022 cover after that ridiculous 37-foot bank shot 3 against UCLA to send Gonzaga to their second ever national championship. I think Suggs, and particularly an image of him pumping his fist after jumping on the table after that shot, I think that probably would have been a cover. I've already seen a bunch of people mock it up as a potential cover for NCAA 22 had it come out that year. So I think Suggs probably would have done it. I think Timme might have done it. Although, again, if Suggs made it, I don't know if they'd have put another Gonzaga player in that short of a window. But I don't really see anybody else. Like Gonzaga's 2017 team was great, but I don't think like Karnowski would have made it, or Williams Goss. Maybe one of those guys. Maybe in 19 you get a Rui. I could see Rui being at least in the conversation for a cover, but I think there'd be other players that would have gotten that title before him, like that 2019 season was like maybe like Kyle Guy at Virginia or somebody like that might have made the cover instead. But I think Suggs or Timme are the most likely candidates by a pretty considerable amount. And honestly, I'm not sure there's anybody else outside of maybe Rui that I think would really be in this conversation. All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. We got more fun stuff coming your way. We're going to record another show here soon, talking about some more recruiting updates, some guys that Gonzaga has already been pursuing, and some updates on them. We'll get more on that coming up very soon as well. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.